Welcome, Church Besties. I'm Kinsey.
And I'm Joey.
And we are so happy to have you here with us on this fine Sunday morning. If you are new with us or new-ish, you've been coming here for a couple weeks, or if this is your first Sunday, we would love to get to know you a little bit better. After the service, feel free to come out to the lobby and meet us at the Welcome Center. We have a gift for you. But we also would like it if you would text the word new to 40727. Just get a little bit more information about you to get to know you better.
Yes, and not only can you text new to 40727, but if you've been looking around and seeing all the volunteers serving and doing the things, and you think that looks like a lot of fun, you want to greet, work in a coffee bar, help out with kids, text SERVE to 40727. We could use your help any and everywhere, and we'd love to have you. It's a very big part of our community and a part of our heart to serve together.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of serving, a reminder that immediately after service today, we have our trunk or treat out in the parking lot. If you are already using a trunk to help us out with that, if you've donated candy, we would love to see you there. There's going to be a great opportunity for the community to come and have a safe trick-or-treating experience. So a reminder that is right after church today.
Yes, today, right after church today. But right now, if you guys can grab a Bible, grab your seat, get ready for the next chapter in Dark Horses.
Good morning. I'd like to start out by issuing an apology. Apparently, I had my microphone on, but the 15 minutes prior to the service leading up, so none of you knew that, but if you're online with us today, perhaps you tried to click in and attend a little early. I mean, I don't recall everything I said. I do know I didn't use the restroom, so you're welcome for that. But I would just like to go ahead and open up with that. That's not normal. If you're wondering, if you're in person with us and you're wondering, is it normal? Is it normal church attire to be dressed like a minion or an M&M or a clown? Sometimes. Sometimes. But thank you to all of you that, you wanted to get in the spirit. I've seen scarecrows and what I really love are the ones of you that you're actually not, signed up to serve today. You just woke up today and went, you know what? I'm going to do a little something. And you did. And I love that about you. Well, we are in part 2 of the series Dark Horses. We started last week and we ended last week on a little bit of a cliffhanger. Little bit of, Nehemiah's story, and then we got to a really important part. I'm so sorry, but this is 3 scarecrows just walked in. I'm sure it's fine. You're fine, right? You look lovely. It's really, that's something, what you guys have going on there. That's a lot of effort. I appreciate that. Okay, I can't do this the whole sermon. I can't do this. You're a minion. You have the glasses. Okay. Focus, Heather. Now, so we're going to pick up where we left off with Nehemiah. So if you were not able to be with us or listen to the sermon this week, let me just give a really brief synopsis so that we all start on the same page. So Nehemiah, there's an entire book of the Bible dedicated to Nehemiah's story. He was a prophet, and he was the cupbearer to a king named King Artaxerxes. And the cupbearer's job was simply to either live or die. The cupbearer would be next to the king, and when the king was served wine, the cupbearer would take the cup and drink it, and everyone would wait. If the cupbearer remained standing and alive, the king would know he could continue to drink the wine. But if the cupbearer died, obviously it was poisoned by an enemy, and the king would know to not drink the wine. And so that was Nehemiah's job. Nehemiah was essentially an unessential person. Because if he were to die, well, they would just simply put someone else into his position and wait for them to live or die. He was unessential, disposable. His only value was whether he was breathing or not. But Nehemiah said yes to an invitation from the Lord. See, when Nehemiah's friends came to visit him and said, hey, your hometown, it's in rubble. All of your family, all of your friends have been unable to rebuild the town that has been long devastated. Nehemiah went, and we talked about last week, he sat down. And the passage tells us that he wept. He fasted, asked God what is going on. Said he prayed, Lord, what would you have me to do? The Lord's invitation to him was, well, somebody ought to do something. Might as well be you, Nehemiah. And so then Nehemiah stood up. Somebody should do something, might as well be me. And so he goes to the king to ask permission to go lead the endeavor, to go rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and the temple. This is no small project. This is not a weekend side hustle. This is a massive endeavor. Bear in mind, his job was the cup bearer. He's got no money. He's got no resources. He hasn't been to Jerusalem since all of this happened, so he hasn't even seen the state of it. But he said yes before he asked how. Last week we talked about that is the sign of an unwavering mission. When God asks you to do something and you say yes before you ask him how. Because don't we all know that if we asked how and God told us, we would never say yes. Right, married people? Just we're in church, just telling the truth. You know, if you're slow to the uptick is what I mean. You know, you're in love, you get married. You're like, yes, I will marry you. And if someone had come along to you and read you chapter 42 of the book of marriage in your life, and said this will happen and this will happen and this will happen, you would never have said yes. But God in his infinite wisdom, all throughout Scripture from Genesis to Revelation, right? Ask people to say yes before the how. Because he knows that in the yes and then the how, we will see transformation. Our lives will be transformed. Other people's lives will be transformed, be made more into the image of God. All right, so let's pick up. Let's see what happens when he goes to the king. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 4. The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, because let me remind you again, if you didn't get a chance, to appear before the king with anything but a happy face would get you executed in this day, because no one wanted the king to feel sad or down. And so this particular verse is actually incredibly profound. It says, "And I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah, where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it." That is a huge statement. I mean, think about what this one man is saying. Let me go, release me, so that I may go do this impossible task that I do not have the resources, the training, the know-how. Let me go do that. But you know, somebody's got to do something. It might as well be him. So the king, in verse 6, the king with the queen sitting beside him asked me, "How long will your journey take, and when will you get back?" It pleased the king to send me, so I sent a time. See, this is the deal. He said yes before how. Because our responsibility is the yes, God's responsibility is the how. And God takes the onus of the responsibility for making the how happen as long as we say yes. Was it likely? Was there a statistical probability that the king was going to say yes? Absolutely not. But Nehemiah trusted, and he even went afraid to do it. All right, let's keep reading. He's very bold. Verse 7, I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. Basically, hey, I'm going to walk through enemy territory. Can you talk to your friends about that and let me go through? And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I occupy. Also, I have nothing to do this with, king. Could you provide it all? And because the gracious hand of my God was on me. If you have your Bible, you should underline that. You should put a star by that. Because the gracious hand of my God was on me. The king, what? Granted my requests. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. He said yes. Sounds like he'd sort of come up with a plan. The plan being the king would provide everything without yet having gotten permission from the king. So once he got permission, and that was a yes, notice he just presented the invitation before he asked for the resource. King says yes. He's like, this is going well. Seems to be going well. Also, could you provide? And he says, the gracious hand of God was on me. Listen, this is what happens when you've sat down with God and you've allowed your heart to break over something. And God invites you into being part of the solution. What if we are actually the answer to most of our prayers? Invites us into being part of the solution. We say yes to God, and then we stand up. And the gracious hand of God is upon us as we begin to walk it out. So God did only what God could do, and Nehemiah did what he needed to do. Nehemiah goes back. It had been 140 years that the walls had been unable to be rebuilt. 140 years. The project began. The people made great progress. By the way, I'm skipping loads in the book of Nehemiah. Just kind of summing up for you here. Great progress had been made. I know, Mark, are you trying to follow along? And you're like, wait. Yeah. Dressed as a princess. I appreciate that. So, skipping chapter. Here we are. They've made great progress, all right, in rebuilding the walls and rebuilding the temple. Now, I'd like to give you a little bit of a side note. Why is this such a big deal? Because their walls were broken and their temple was broken down. This is such a big deal, and the people were in such despair over it, and Nehemiah was so compelled by it because this was 444 years before Jesus ever came on the scene. And so God's people had to live by what is called the Old Testament law. And in the Old Testament law, there were literally hundreds of rules, if you will, on how to engage with the temple so that you could be in God's presence. And if you didn't follow all the rules of the temple, you were considered unclean, out of communion with God, unholy, in sin, unforgiven. So if the temple wasn't right, none of the people could be right with God. You tracking with me? So Nehemiah's compulsion towards this is because all of these people can't be in right relationship with God unless someone does something about that. Church, this is what I want us to get our hearts around, and I want God to break our hearts over. there are people who are not in a relationship with God. They don't know God. They might be uninterested in God. No one's talked to them about Jesus. Over 88,000 people just in Madison County alone have said they believe in nothing. There's no intimacy. There's no prayers. There's nothing. And here we are. And my prayer is that we would have a moment, that we would sit and our heart would break over that. And that we would pray, God, how can we show us what to do? And that we would get up having said yes to that problem, even without knowing all the answers yet. Does your heart break over it? Now, as I said, people made great progress. Walls started getting rebuilt. Temple being put together. But the hardest part of this vision, this dream, was actually not getting permission from the king. The hardest part wasn't even that Nehemiah would have to travel 1,000 miles by foot to get this done. The hardest part wasn't even gathering all of the materials to reconstruct a wall without the use of trucks or transportation or anything mechanized. If last week's truth was that God can use anyone and wants to use everyone, I'd like to give you a cornerstone truth for today's message, which is the devil loves discouragement. Can I get an amen? The devil loves discouragement. And it would be discouragement that became the hardest obstacle to overcome. Not all of these things that on paper looked impossible. God would take care of that. It would be the discouragement that the devil began to whisper. So, how does the devil discourage? Well, I'm glad you asked. He does it a couple of different ways. The first way the devil loves to discourage us from the mission God has called us to is from the outside. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 1. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews. Who is Sanballat? Well, he is this high and lofty government official that was in the area watching the Jews suddenly get unified, grow some strength, pick up a tool, and begin to build what had been in rubble. The people that had once been slaves to this government appeared to be figuring out how no longer to live as slaves. Sanballat did not like this. So Sanballat, in all of his maturity, verse 2, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, now this is my paraphrase, but I kind of picture him standing back, watching his little buddies next to him. Who are those feeble Jews? What are they doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble burned as they are? Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, sidekick, said, what are they building? If even a fox climbed up on it, he would break down their walls of stones. Ha, 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 ha. Grown men standing there making fun of the Jews. Oh, if a little fox ran up there, the walls would just fall down. See, the Israelites had opponents that knew if these walls are rebuilt, these people become strong again. This nation becomes unbeatable again. These people that we have managed to make subservient to us, what if they want to make us subservient to them? Pride. They wanted to keep the Jews in rubble, weak, broken, dependent. They're basically pointing their fingers at them going, you fools. The devil loves discouragement. Things from the outside tend to have a couple lanes they run in. The first one is obstacles. I'm sure we've all had them. We become discouraged when we want to get out of debt, but then our car breaks down. Yeah? When you're going to get a new career, but then you interview for job after job after job and you just don't get it. When you decide to ask someone out and someone else got to them first. And you get discouraged when these obstacles present themselves. So how do you respond? How should we respond when things don't go like we thought they would? J.K. Rowling, who is the author of the Harry Potter series, she was jobless, newly divorced, and on the edge of losing her home. The Harry Potter manuscript had been rejected 12 times. Wouldn't you love to talk to the first person who rejected it? Right? Steve Jobs, from Apple. If you don't have Apple, I don't know. I pray for you. Okay, but anyway, he was fired from Apple, the company he founded, before he came back and built it into the company that it is today. Einstein was unable to speak until the age of 9. He was expelled from school, Einstein, rejected from the tech school that he applied to. Abraham Lincoln had a business that failed. He then had a nervous breakdown and was defeated in his first run for president. Michael Jordan, arguably the greatest basketball player of all time. I had to explain this to my children who didn't know who he was. Bless him. He's been quoted as saying, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost 300 games, and 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. Walt Disney dropped out of school to join the Army and failed at getting into the Army. He went bankrupt with his first company, was fired from a newspaper for not being creative. But that discouragement didn't seem to defeat any of them, did it? No one said it would be easy. No one said that whatever mission God gave to you, whatever you said yes to, whatever we say yes to as a church, I can tell you this, it will not be easy. There is not a single mission you read about in Scripture that God gave to a person that they then walked out that was easy. It was full of obstacles. Over and over and over again. But when they come, our responsibility is you just got to go back into the chair, right? Sit back down. I mean, we talked about this, Lord. You had to imagine that Nehemiah many, many times, while the government is standing around him pointing fingers and laughing, had to go back to the Lord and say, okay, I got to remember what you said, and then I just got to get back up. Discouragement can be defeating. Can I tell you, every God-given vision, right about the middle of it, has a, am I crazy moment? Everyone. I mean, you start it and you're ready to go. Here Nehemiah is, king gives a yes. Not only that, but he resources the entire endeavor. He gets there. They're making progress, right? Look at God. Isn't God good? Then the government steps in. And you have a, am I crazy? I'm crazy. Was that God? Maybe it wasn't God. I mean, it couldn't be God if there's all these obstacles, right? How many times have you thought that God changed his mind or that you heard him wrong simply because obstacles presented themselves. Discouragement came. Too many God-given dreams die at the first sight of an obstacle. Obstacles do not mean God has changed his mind. They do not mean you got it wrong. What they do mean is that the devil loves discouragement. Another way that we experience discouragement from the outside is through criticism. Have any of you ever been criticized for anything at all? See, criticism is just when someone expresses their disapproval of something that you're doing, or really just of who you are. We have all been criticized. You know, when you decide to follow Jesus and you make life changes, and then your old friends start to say, whatever, we know who you really are. Right? Criticism. When you go out on a limb, you share an ideal with someone, a dream, something you think that God might be asking of you, even a goal. You've held it close to your vest, but you decide to be vulnerable and you share it, and then someone just tells you all the reasons it cannot happen. Criticism. Let me share this with you. And honestly, this is a principle that I have to remind myself of daily. If you lead anything, and you all do, whether you lead yourself, self-leadership, your family, people at work, friendships, if you lead in any environment at all, and you are going to make any God-directed change or do something with your life at all, you will face criticism. You will. When you do something that God has asked you to do, and you said yes before knowing how, everyone else will want to tell you that because you don't know how, you should never have said yes. And I'm here to tell you, you will never lead anything, including yourself, beyond the level of your pain tolerance. If people's criticism, you can push through it until you get here, you will never lead here. You'll meet half your goal. You'll get partway down the field. You'll settle on the wrong side of the Jordan River before it parts. You have to be able to hold and handle the criticism of the sand ballots in the world, to keep pushing through what God told you to do. The reason things don't get to completion that God said do, especially in the church, is because when criticism comes, the leadership of the church goes, someone's upset, we should stop. And there's always a they. They're upset. A group of people, you know what I found, just a little side note piece of trivia? There's never a they. There's usually a one or two. Who is they? Well, no, really, who is they? Well, so-and-so. So one. Churches die because they allow criticism to dictate whether or not they will push forward into God's mission. If a church is not engaged in something that they allowed to break their heart, that they prayed to the Lord about and asked for wisdom, and God gave the invitation and the church said yes, and they got up and collectively said, unifiedly said together, we're going to do this. If a church is not engaged in something like that, a church is engaged in nothing but themselves. And what I'm saying is not widely popular. I will get criticism for this. Just rewind the tape. Or not tape. Go back on the stream. I don't know the word. I learned a long time ago that if I let my feelings get hurt over criticism, I will never be able to handle anything more than what I'm already doing. And you can't either. If we let our hurt feelings, because, listen, not stopping God-given missions due to criticism doesn't mean that you don't allow the criticism to hurt, right? We're all human. You don't become callous. But you have to stay courageous in the midst of criticism. A person on a mission, like Nehemiah, has to wake up every day. Nehemiah had to wake up every day knowing someone was going to misunderstand what he was trying to do. Somebody, you know? And Nehemiah could have gone over here and said, well, hey, Sanballat, this is the deal, and let me get the whiteboard out and try and explain this to you. He didn't. Nehemiah could have gone over and gathered the Israelites around him and go, they're being so mean to me. Get them. I don't know, something. I mean, he could have gathered people around him, sort of validated his frustration and said, right, they're awful, we're great. I mean, whatever. He didn't get into a debate. He didn't yell back. He didn't throw gestures to Sanballat. But he also didn't quit. So how did Nehemiah manage this, the criticism? Well, in verse 4 of chapter 4, he says, hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. So here's what Nehemiah did. Can I sum up? He took it back to God, said, you deal with this, and then he got back up and went to work. How much more would we accomplish for the kingdom if we would just go to God and get back to work? What if it really is that simple? Go to God, get back to work. Take it to him. It's his to deal with. Remember, he's made the way the whole way through, right? Whole way through. Criticized, obstacles. Go to God and get back to work. So many of you love this church, and you know why? Because criticism and obstacles do not keep this church from doing what God has called it to do. I told you last week, I'm going to tell you this week. In the month of November, we're going to talk about some things that God has called us to do. I'm going to get real specific and very detailed, and I'm going to invite you into it. And it will take all of us. It won't be just one person that can do it. It will be collectively a people of God that are willing to say yes before they know all the hows. See, criticism, it can affect you, and it does. But it doesn't have to direct you, and it certainly shouldn't control you. Remind yourself that the devil loves discouragement. Loves it. So from the outside, he discourages, and he also discourages from the inside, Nehemiah 4:10. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Well, it's about time this happens. This seems about right. All of a sudden, the people that are working on it go, oh, they're listening to all the taunts, and they're listening to the criticism, and they're feeling the discouragement. And so they turn to Nehemiah and they go, we're tired. We cannot do this. Their words are, we cannot rebuild the wall. You see, in the chapters preceding it, all of the discouragers and all of the criticizers would come along and knock down what they'd been doing, or they'd have to start over in this section, or this would go wrong and this would go wrong. All the while, they're still making progress, but it was slow to begin with. We're tired. We cannot. It's impossible. Nehemiah. Maybe we used to be strong, but we're not strong anymore. Maybe if what is behind us were the glory days, what if what is behind us were the best days? But Nehemiah, being the leader that he is, says this. Nehemiah 4:14. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is what? Great and awesome. And fight for your brothers, your sons, and your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Nehemiah says, shut your mouth. Friends, family, officials, leaders, remember God. Remember when you sat with him. Remember when you said yes. Remember that God is great and awesome. Remember that this is the great and awesome God that parted the Red Seas and freed our ancestors, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our great-great-grandparents from the Egyptians. Remember the great and awesome God who took us before the Jordan River and parted the Jordan River. Remember the great and awesome God who has sent deliverer after deliverer after deliverer to us to take us out of captivity and into freedom. Remember, that is the same God that is going to enable us to rebuild this wall. The wall that had lied in rubble 140 years. Do you know how long it took for Nehemiah to lead the charge to rebuild it? 50, anyone know? 52 days. 52 days. Less than 2 months to take something that had been in rubbles for decades, that everyone said was impossible, and they did it in less than 2 months. Remember what God has already done, because it will tether you to what he's promised he will do. Remember the Lord and fight for your cause. Those are the two things that Nehemiah said. Hey, remember God. And then he said, fight for your wives and your children and their children. Fight for your sons and your daughters. Fight for your brothers and your sisters. Somebody has to do something. It might as well be us. Fight for your cause. Don't give up. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. See, when discouragement came, instead of like fight for it, the Jews were like, grab your kids, grab your wife, let's run to the cave. Right? I don't know if it went just like that, but something in my mind, it was very, very similar. Run, you know? Because the Israelites had known for so long what it meant to be defeated. They were learning how to live from a place of victory. And so must we. If you follow Jesus, you get to live from a place of victory and not defeat. You get to lean into his power. Nehemiah 4:17 through 18. This is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as they worked. Y'all, the devil loves discouragement, and Christianity is no playground. It is a battleground. And when you are on a mission from God, you will have a tool in one hand to accomplish it, but you will need to keep a weapon on the other. Remember God's word. Remain in prayer. Go back to the chair, whatever it takes to stay faithful to what God has called you to. So again, I'm going to ask you a question today. What breaks your heart? Does anything break your heart that is not about you? Is there a person, a group of people, a problem, a scenario, a situation that breaks your heart when you see it, when you hear it? Enough that you would say yes to being part of the solution. I'd like for us to close in a song today. I don't know, maybe it'll become our anthem for the next few weeks. We'll see. Called Waymaker. Y'all, some of you know it. You must know it. Because when you're in the middle of something and you reach the, am I crazy moment? Am I crazy? Is this crazy? You got to remember that it's God who makes a way, isn't it, church? So would you stand with me? Would you hold your hands out as I pray? And then as we begin to sing, and Lord, I pray that you would be a way maker.